You can close it down now. We could almost just dismiss right now and just go straight to the meal and keep on fellowshipping. I think that would be good. You guys, it's hard to slow you guys down. Good, okay. All right, open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 17. Exodus chapter 17, we're going to be picking up in verse 8. Before we read the text, just a little bit of a review. I've been preaching through Exodus, and we've been following the story of what God is doing with his people. They started off enslaved in the land of Egypt. We watched God miraculously save and deliver them from out of bondage, bring them out of Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. And the last time I preached, we looked at the way of the wilderness and how God was using their time in the wilderness to form and to shape them into his people, and that the wilderness, the suffering, the hardship in the wilderness it wasn't just pointless. There was a point to it, and the point was that it was through the trials in the wilderness that God was shaping them into and preparing them to go into the promised land and to reflect his plan, his purpose into the world. We're going to pick up in verse 8 of chapter 17. I'm going to have you guys read it. And basically, if you feel led, stand up, read however many verses you want to, and then sit down, and then somebody else can pick up and read as many verses as you want to. We're going to read until we get to the end of chapter 18. So a lot of scripture here, but it's all fairly crucial as we get through this. So the time is yours. If you feel led to read the text, start in verse 8 of chapter 17. Read loudly and clearly so everyone can hear.
Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, Choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed.
But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword.
Then the Lord said to Moses, Write this as a memorial in the book, and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called it in the name of the Lord. The Lord is my banner, saying, A hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation.
Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, and the father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife, Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her two sons. One son's named Gershon, for Moses said, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land, and the other was named Eleazar, for he said, My father's God was my helper, he saved me from the sword of Pharaoh.
Verse 5 of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. And when he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons with her. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Moses and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians.
Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, out of the hand of the and has delivered his people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all else, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with me." And Jethro, his father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrificed to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of the people.
And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his law."
Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice, for the duty of rights. God is with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God, and you shall warn them about the statutes and laws, and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for 8 men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and pay right, and place such men over the people as chief of thousands, hundreds, 50s, and tens."
And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you. But any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will grant you. You will be able to endure. And all this people also will go to their place with you.
So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands and hundreds and 50s and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. Amen. Thank you all for participating in that. So going back to the first thing we did this morning, when you turn to your neighbor and ask them, "How was your week?" I'm curious, how many of you used the word busy? Raise your hand if you said busy in some word that would describe, that would be synonymous to busy. Raise your hand above your ears. Okay, so like half of you, at least. And the other half of you, just like if you would have had more time, eventually you would have said busy, most likely. So there's a study, a little bit of a study done by a lady called Nora Rosendahl, and she did this little experiment where she asked, I want to say it was like 1,500 people. She asked them, "How are you?" She said that 8 times out of 10 they used the word busy. In some they responded with the word busy. I don't know if this is true or not, but it makes a good story. There was an immigrant who came to the United States and was learning the English language, and whenever he would ask someone, "How are you?" He came to believe that the word busy meant good, because he heard it so often. He was like, "How are you?" Somebody said busy, and so he was like, "Oh, that busy must mean good." We live in a culture that is busy, and there's something that has actually changed, I think, to where we view busyness as almost as a status symbol, to where it used to be that possessions, how much money you had, how many possessions you had, was sort of a status symbol. Today, it's like if you're not busy, or whoever is busy must have some sort of some status. This busyness that we live, busy life that we live, ends up causing what Richard Swenson in his book Margin, he calls it overload. And he uses the term overload to describe how many of us take on much more than what we're able to handle, mentally or physically or even emotionally. He describes this with a couple different ways. Some different ways that this expresses itself is in activity overload. School, work, two sets of families, church, small group, neighborhood activities. We're constantly doing things. We're constantly filling up our calendars with things. We're double booking. We're having to cancel because we just can't cram it all in. So we have activity overload. We have change overload, where for thousands of years, your life didn't change a whole lot from the time you were born to the time you died. You grew up in the same community, you had the same neighbors all your life, and you grow up, live, have children, and die in that community. Today, change is constant. We're constantly changing where we live, our jobs, our friends. Change is just constant. We have commitment overload. He says in his book, Margin, he says, most of us have more commitments than time. Some people just can't say no. They take on too many relationships and too many responsibilities. They enroll in too many courses, hold down too many jobs, volunteer for too many tasks, make too many appointments, serve on too many committees, and have too many friends. Does that resonate with any of you all? Okay. Melody's smiling back there. Yes, he talks about expectation overload. An advertising firm had this, I don't know which one it was, but it had this billboard that said, "Your world should know no boundaries. If you can dream it, you can do it. There's no limit to your ability." And this problem of busyness that leads to overloaded lives is a problem that actually, I think it especially plagues leaders today, and especially church leaders. There's some statistics, alarming statistics that I read about a couple different studies done on church leaders, specifically pastors. In 2013, there was a study done by Schaeffer Institute that reported that 90% of pastors report working 55 to 70 hours a week, and 50% of them feel unable to meet all the demands of their job. Now, the study went on further to say, and they found, this was in 2013, and said that 1,700 pastors leave the ministry each month. And the reasons they cite are depression, burnout, or being overworked as the primary reasons for quitting. In 2022, 40% of pastors showed a high risk of burnout. That was almost a 400% increase from 2015, when that number was just 11%. So 40% of pastors showing a high risk of burnout. 41% have seriously considered quitting over the past year. So you guys are looking at me a little bit shocked, and I want to say from the outset that I don't share these statistics to guilt trip you as a congregation or to have a pity party for Sean or I. I'm just saying this is the reality of church leaders in America today. And it's the reality that I think we have to be honest with ourselves as church leaders, or anyone in church leadership of any type, say this is the reality for a lot of people in church leadership. The text we're looking at today, I think, speaks to this problem. This story that we just read speaks into this problem, and I think can give us some principles, some guiding principles for how we deal with this problem of overload with responsibility and commitment within church. So, looking back at the lesson today, or at the verses, the first part of chapter 18, Jethro, who is referred to as a priest of Midian, he's also the father of Moses' wife Zipporah. he comes to Moses with Moses' two sons. The last time we read about Jethro was in chapter 4, when Moses was in Midian, and God called Moses to go back to Egypt, and Moses went to Jethro and said this specifically. He said, to see whether his brothers are still alive. So Moses said, Jethro, I want to go back to Egypt just to check up on my brothers. Fast forward to chapter 18, and now they finally meet up again, and Moses went from checking in on his brothers to leading his entire enslaved people group up out of Egypt. And so Jethro goes into Moses' tent here in chapter 18, and Moses tells Jethro everything that God has done since they last saw each other. And Jethro says, verse 9 says, Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Sort of an amazing story. I don't think Jethro was quite prepared to hear all of that when he met up with Moses. But nevertheless, he rejoiced. He brought a burnt offering and a sacrifice to God in gratitude, and sat down to eat with the elders of Israel. The next day, if you look at verse 13, it says, the next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. From morning until evening, Moses sat there. For 400 plus years, while the Israelites were in Egypt, they had been part of the Egyptian system. And I don't know what that system looked like as far as justice, laws, what that looked like for if you were a slave. But one thing is clear is that Pharaoh was in charge, and he had an entire system under him, an entire host of priests, of lawmakers, of magistrates, and other leaders to help, create this system where they could carry out the decrees that Moses or that Pharaoh had for his kingdom, for his empire. But now Moses and the Israelites, they weren't part of that system anymore. They had fled that system, and now they're in the wilderness. And Moses finds himself being the one-man court, the only sheriff in town, basically. And what we see here in chapter 18 is that he sits down and he is trying to carry out the load of leading this people, this group of people, and he's struggling. Jethro responds. He sees this. Moses' father-in-law sees this, which father-in-laws often have just good advice. Normally, if your father-in-law tells you something, you should probably pay attention. He says this, Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you are doing is not good. That's not fun to hear from a father-in-law. I've heard it. What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. You are not able to do it alone. And I wonder how Moses heard that. I wonder if his pride was hurt, or if maybe his ego was sort of bruised. He was like, come on, Jethro. I literally led this people out of Egypt. We crossed the Red Sea. What do you mean I can't do it alone? I've been doing this alone up until now. What are you talking about? But Jethro gives him this advice. And I think this is where this is some of the earliest, wisdom and advice on church, or just on leadership in general, that I think we can learn from here, and that I think there's so much wisdom here. The first thing Jethro tells him is that we can learn too is understand your role. So if you're a church leader, if you're a leader of any type, if you're a parent, if you're a business owner, if you're in charge of leading any group of people at all, I think it's crucial that you do this, is to understand your role. Jethro tells him, "You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God." Jethro reminds Moses, this is what you're supposed to do. This is your role. This is what you're asked to do. Represent the people before God, and you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. So 2 things. Represent the people before God. That's your primary role, Moses. And bring their cases to God. And then secondly is to teach the law. Shall warn them and let them know the way that they must walk and what they must do. Moses had to understand what his role was, so in order to actually accomplish it, in order to actually do it. I think often, if we don't understand or have a clear picture of what our role is within an organization or even within church, we're tempted to take on more than what we can handle. We don't know when to say yes or when to say no. We just say yes to everything, like Moses, because we think we can do it all. And in some ways, sometimes it hurts us to say, you know what, this is too much for me. I can't actually do all of this. We like to think that we can handle everything. And there takes humility, like Moses, I think, to say, you know what, you're right, I can't do everything. And I can't know what to say no to if I don't understand clearly what my role is. So secondly, Jethro gave him further instruction. First, understand your role. Secondly, to spread the load. He says, "Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of 50s, and of 10s." Spread the load. The work that Moses was called to do was overwhelming. It was a task that he was not able to do on his own. The work of the church today, globally, but even locally, is a work that is greater than what 1 or 2 people can do by themselves. The work that we at specifically in Winfield, Ohio, as Grace Point Church, is a big work. It's a big call. It's a lifetime of work, and it's a work that is much bigger than one man. I think this is something that we can learn as a church at Grace Point is like Moses. To, instead of Sean or I trying to do everything, is spreading the work out amongst others who are equipped to do that work. And we do that in a couple different ways. I think, number one, he said, call forth new leaders. Call forth new leaders. He told Moses, get men who are God-fearing, men who love God, who have a testimony of faithfulness, have a testimony of living upstanding lives, who are trustworthy. You can trust them. Who hate a bribe. Basically, who are men of integrity, men who you can trust. Have them watch over smaller groups of people in order to handle all the load. Today, we do that through a couple different ways. We do that through having ordinations. In the New Testament, Paul talks about the gifts within the church. He talks about the apostles, pastors, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry. I don't I'm not entirely sure yet when we will have an ordination, but we will need to eventually. And the purpose of that is for this very reason, is to spread the load, to spread the work of ministry. But it's not only within the pastoral team. We've also spread the load at church through calling forth discipleship group leaders to help take care of to help do soul care. We do that through things like superintendent at church. And the work of church life in general is a big work. So I think we want to do a good job of doing this. I think secondly, with that, actually I love this quote by Steve Byler in a class I took a couple months ago at Zolliken. He said this, talking about church leadership structure. He said that if the vine is Christ and we are the branches that are part of that, the way church is structured, and specifically church leadership structure, is like the trellis that supports the growth of that vine. And he said this, he said, it's an abuse of neglect if an inadequate trellis isn't built to support the vines around it. It's an abuse of neglect if an adequate trellis isn't built to support the vines around it. And the vine will only be as healthy as the trellis that supports its growth. I think that's true, and it's challenging, convicting. Jethro further told Moses in verse 22, he said, "Let them judge people at all times." He gave them a clear role. He said he had Moses give his people these leaders a clear role and clear responsibility, so that they had an accurate picture, a clear picture of what their task was. It was to judge amongst smaller matters amongst the people, and as things got more complex, they rose to the surface until Moses would only be responsible for making the big decisions. Think of, I don't know, maybe like the Supreme Court in America today. The Supreme Court doesn't sit there and make decisions on whether or not, like, my speeding ticket was valid or not. Like, they make big decisions. Abortion, like the big things. That's essentially what Moses was going to be doing. But the people under him were to have a clear picture of their role and responsibility. I think for us today, I think we need to ask ourselves this: if you've been asked to do a job at Grace Point, do you have a clear picture of what your responsibility is, what it means? If you're a small group leader, do you have clarity around what is my role? What is my responsibility? What's expected of me? What should I be doing? How do I know if I'm doing my task correctly? I think we need to be asking questions like, are there things that are getting neglected? Are there people that are being neglected? What's not getting accomplished? So clarify roles and responsibilities. And we see how, I'll end then with the results of this, but I want to jump back to the last part of chapter 17. Turn your Bibles back to chapter 17, verse 8. We have this sort of bizarre, in my opinion, this sort of bizarre account of the first maybe battle that Israel faces when they come out of Egypt. And that is the Amalekites come out against Israel. They have this battle. Moses tells Joshua, go out, choose men, go out and fight with Amalek. Just like another Tuesday morning, just go out and battle this random group of people that come out in the wilderness So they go out, they fight, and at the top of the hill, and he had, says, he took the staff of God with him, the staff that he had